The dust was the first thing she noticed. It got everywhere, a fine, gritty talcum powder that coated the throat and stung the eyes. As the rotor wash from the departing Black Hawk buffeted her, Sergeant Eva Rostova stood motionless, a solitary figure amidst the swirling beige storm of the forward operating base's landing zone. The heat was a physical weight, pressing down on her worn body armor. She adjusted the strap of her heavy rucksack, her eyes a cool and unsettling shade of gunmetal gray, already scanning the perimeter. They were watching her. Of course, they were. She could feel their gazes from the sandbagged guard posts, from the open bay of the maintenance shed. A new transfer was always a spectacle, but a female comms specialist assigned to a Tier 1 adjacent unit like Valkyrie, she was a walking anomaly. She kept her expression neutral, a practiced mask of blank professionalism, as a broad-shouldered man with a master sergeant's chevrons on his sleeve approached. His face was tanned leather, etched with the lines of a dozen deployments. This was Master Sergeant Cole, the team leader. His handshake was firm, brief, and devoid of warmth. "Rostova, heard you were coming. Grab your gear, your hooch is that way." He gestured with a tilt of his head towards a row of dusty ISO containers. "Briefing at 1600. Don't be late." She nodded silently, hoisting her duffel. As she turned to follow his direction, a low chuckle carried on the dry air. She didn't need to see the source to know it was meant for her. A group of 3 operators lounged near a heavily modified Ford Ranger, their rifles leaning against the tires. Their eyes were not on her face, but on her arms, where the sleeves of her uniform were rolled up against the oppressive heat. The scars were there, pale and web-like against her sun-starved skin, tracing a map of old pain from her wrists up towards her elbows. One of the men, a giant with a thick neck and a beard that seemed to swallow his face, nudged his companion. "Looks like she got on the wrong side of a barbed wire fence back home," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. The others smirked. Eva didn't flinch. She didn't speed up or slow down. She simply kept walking, her boots crunching on the gravel. She had heard it all before. The assumptions were always the same. A training accident, a domestic mishap, anything but the truth. Their laughter was a dull, familiar echo, a sound that had followed her from one assignment to the next. It was easier for them to believe in a clumsy woman than a battle-hardened one. She preferred it that way. Anonymity was a shield. Inside her container, the air was stale and hot. She dropped her bags on the cot, the metal frame groaning in protest. The room was sparse, just the bed, a small locker, and a desk. It was enough. From a zipped pocket inside her duffel, she retrieved a single worn photograph. The colors were faded, bleeding into sepia tones. It showed a woman with Ava's same sharp cheekbones and intelligent eyes, laughing freely, her head thrown back in a moment of unburdened joy. Her mother Anya, a ghost. Ava traced the image with a finger, the ghost of a smile touching her own lips. Then the moment passed. The mask returned. She had a briefing to attend. The mission, whatever it was, would provide a welcome distraction from the memories and the mocking eyes of the men who thought they knew what courage looked like. They saw scars as weakness. She knew they were a testament to survival, a price paid a long time ago, in a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The briefing room was a claustrophobic metal box, smelling of stale coffee, sweat, and the sharp, clean scent of gun oil. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale, unforgiving glow on the faces of the Valkyrie team. Ava took a seat at the back, a deliberate choice that placed her just outside the main circle of camaraderie. She placed her notebook on the scarred wooden table, her posture ramrod straight. The large men of the team filled the space with their presence, their relaxed, almost lazy confidence a stark contrast to her quiet intensity. Master Sergeant Cole stood before a large map pinned to a corkboard, his pointer tapping against a narrow valley marked with topographic lines. "All right. Listen up," Cole's voice cut through the low murmurs. "This is a HVT, a facilitator moving weapons and money through the Gomal Pass. Our job is to intercept. Simple in and out." His eyes swept the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on Ava. "Rostova, you'll be on comms with the talk. Keep the channel clear and the updates flowing. We've had intermittent jamming in this sector, so stay sharp. The giant who had laughed at her earlier, introduced as Deacon, leaned back in his chair, the plastic groaning under his weight. He didn't look at her, but his comment was meant for the entire room. Hope the new gear knows the difference between static and a real jam. Last thing we need is a panic call because someone can't tune a radio. A few of the other operators chuckled softly. It was a test, a small probe to see if she would react. Ava kept her eyes fixed on the map, her expression unchanged. She simply gave a single curt nod. Understood, Sergeant. I'm familiar with the ECM profile in that valley. I'll maintain the link. Her voice was calm, level, and carried a technical authority that momentarily silenced the snickering. Cole gave a grunt that might have been approval and moved on to the assault plan. Later, as the team prepped their gear by the vehicles, the atmosphere was thick with a focused energy. The clatter of magazines being checked, the snap of Velcro on body armor, the low, confident banter, it was a symphony of pre-mission ritual. Eva worked alone on her communications rig inside the lead MRAP, connecting cables and running diagnostics. Deacon approached, slinging his heavy pack into the vehicle. He watched her for a moment, his arms crossed over his broad chest. "You sure you're up for this, Sergeant?" he asked, his tone not quite hostile but deeply skeptical. "It's not a simulation out there." Things get loud. Ava didn't stop working. Her hands moved with sure, efficient movements, connecting a secondary antenna. "I'm sure," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She finally looked up at him, and for the first time, Deacon saw something in her eyes that gave him pause. It wasn't fear or bravado. It was a deep, profound weariness, a cold, flat calm that suggested she was intimately familiar with things getting loud. It was the look of someone who had already seen the worst and had learned to function within the chaos. He opened his mouth to say something else, then closed it, simply nodding once before turning away. The laughter was gone, replaced by a flicker of uneasy curiosity. As the engines roared to life, Eva took a final look at the bustling fob, a fortress of noise and light in the vast, darkening landscape. Then she turned her focus inward, mentally running through the comms protocols, building a wall of professionalism around herself. The mission was beginning, and for now, that was the only thing that mattered. The convoy was a serpent of steel and shadow, crawling through the moonlit, skeletal landscape of the pass. Inside the lead MRAP, the world was reduced to the green glow of night vision, the rumble of the engine, and the tense, crackling silence of men waiting for violence. Ava sat strapped in her seat, the headset pressed tightly against her ears. Her world was a stream of data, the steady hum of the open channel to the Tactical Operations Center, the GPS coordinates blinking on her screen, the occasional terse check-in from the other vehicles. The Valkyrie team around her was a study in controlled stillness. Deacon cradled his rifle, his eyes closed, but Eva knew he wasn't sleeping. Master Sergeant Cole stared out the vision block, his jaw a hard line. The air was thick with the smell of diesel fuel, gun oil, and the sharp tang of adrenaline. Then, the world exploded. It wasn't a single shot, but a sudden deafening storm of lead and rocket-propelled grenades. A deafening crump slammed into the vehicle next to them, lifting it onto two wheels in a shower of sparks. The radio erupted into a chaos of shouted voices. "Contact front! Heavy weapons, left ridge! We're pinned down!" Ava's screen flashed red. The jamming had begun. The steady hum from the talk was replaced by a screeching, metallic hiss. She could feel the panic rising in the confined space. Cole was yelling into his handset, getting only static in return. "Rostova! Get me a goddamn link, now!" he roared, his voice strained as another RPG impact shook their vehicle. Eva's hands didn't tremble. They flew across her console, her mind shutting out the bedlam. The soldiers saw her not as a woman, but as a technician, a lifeline. She bypassed the primary system, her fingers moving with a speed that spoke of brutal experience. She ignored the bullets pinging off the armor like angry hornets. Deacon watched, mesmerized, as she calmly plugged in a secondary satellite antenna. Her focus absolute. She wasn't just following a manual. She was fighting an electronic enemy with an instinct he'd only seen in the most veteran operators. Then she spoke, and her voice was a shock of ice water in the fiery chaos. It was low, calm, and terrifyingly precise. Ghost Rider Actual, this is Valkyrie 7. We are under heavy contact at Grid Whiskey Tango Niner 7. Request immediate fire mission. Enemy concentration on the eastern ridge. Azimuth 085. Danger close. How copy? A moment of static, then a clear, professional voice responded from the sky. Valkyrie 7, Ghost Rider Actual. Solid copy. Painting the target now. Stand by for thunder. The sound of the AC-130 Spectre's cannons was like the sky itself tearing apart. The ridgeline erupted in a continuous, earth-shattering roar. The incoming fire ceased as if a switch had been flipped. In the sudden, ringing silence, the only sound was Eva's calm voice confirming the strike. The men in the vehicle stared at her. The laughter from the FOB was a distant, shameful memory. They had seen a clerk. They had just witnessed a warrior. Master Sergeant Cole, clutching a bleeding shrapnel wound on his leg, looked at her not with gratitude, but with a dawning, profound shock. He had seen that kind of cold, surgical efficiency before, but not in a comm sergeant, not in anyone for a very, very long time. The silence after the gunship's wrath was more deafening than the battle itself. Dust and the acrid smell of cordite hung thick inside the MRAP. For a long moment, no one moved, each man grappling with the sudden shift from near certain death to fragile survival. Then training kicked in. Status, sound off. Master Sergeant Cole's voice was a ragged gasp, pain etching deep lines around his mouth. One by one, the team called out, voices shaky but clear. Miraculously, aside from Cole's leg, they were intact. It was Deacon who broke the spell, his eyes fixed on Ava. He wasn't seeing the scars anymore. He was seeing the steady hands that had just pulled them from the abyss. The vehicle behind us, he said, his voice low and urgent. Jenkins and Alvarez. Without a word, Ava was already moving. She grabbed the med kit from its bracket and shoved the heavy armored door open, disappearing into the hazy gloom. The scene outside was one of utter devastation. The second MRAP was tilted at a sickening angle, its armor peeled open like a tin can. Ava moved with a purpose that left the others trailing. She found Specialist Jenkins conscious but pinned by his leg under a collapsed seat. Alvarez was worse, pale and unconscious, a deep gash on his forehead. While two of the other soldiers worked to free Jenkins, Eva dropped to her knees beside Alvarez. Her movements were not those of a comms specialist. They were the swift, confident actions of a combat medic. She applied a pressure dressing to the head wound with one hand while checking his pulse with the other. She didn't speak. Her entire being focused on the task. Deacon watched as she stabilized Alvarez's neck with a collar from the kit, her touch both firm and gentle. There was no hesitation, no fumbling. It was a practiced, brutal efficiency. Back at the FOB hours later, the atmosphere around Eva had fundamentally shifted. The mocking glances were gone, replaced by averted eyes and nods of respect that bordered on reverence. In the mess hall, she sat alone, as always, pushing food around her plate. Deacon approached, holding 2 cups of coffee. He placed one in front of her. For what it's worth, he said, his voice gruff but sincere. I was wrong. We all were. Eva looked up, her gray eyes meeting his. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. You did your job. I did mine. She didn't smile. The victory felt hollow. The ambush, the precision of the enemy's attack, it felt personal. It had the cold, calculated feel of a trap meant for more than just a routine patrol. That night, in the silence of her container, she didn't look at the photo of her mother. Instead, she studied a map, her finger tracing a route from the ambush site towards the porous, ungovernable border. The answers she sought were no longer in the past. They were out there, in the mountains, and the events of the day felt like a signpost, pointing her directly toward them. The mission was over, but her real objective had just begun. The news swept through the forward operating base like a shockwave. General John Hawk Madsen was coming. Not for a sanitized, pre-announced tour, but for a sudden, blunt force inspection in the wake of the ambush. The base scrambled. Equipment was polished, areas were swept with a new urgency, and a palpable tension settled over everyone. For the soldiers of Valkyrie Team, however, the feeling was different. It was a mix of pride and anxiety. They were heroes, but the spotlight felt uncomfortable, especially for Eva. She watched the preparations with a growing sense of dread, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. General Madsen was not just any officer. He was a legend, a figure from the history books her surrogate father had spoken of in hushed, respectful tones. He was a man connected to a world she had spent her life trying to understand. The day arrived with a blast of rotor wash from a sleek black helicopter. General Madsen emerged, a man who seemed carved from the same granite as the mountains surrounding them. His uniform was impeccable, his posture rigid, and his eyes missed nothing. He moved through the ranks with a quiet, intimidating authority, pinning medals on the chests of the Valkyrie team with a firm hand and a few clipped words of praise. When he reached Eva, the ceremony seemed to slow. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a fleeting second the professional mask of the four-star general slipped. His eyes, sharp and blue as ice, dropped to the scars on her neck, visible above her collar. It was more than a glance. It was a recognition, a flicker of something akin to shock, even pain, that was gone as quickly as it appeared. His hand, as he pinned the medal, hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Sergeant Rostova," he said, his voice low. "A remarkable piece of work in that valley." But his eyes were asking a different, more urgent question. The formal ceremony ended. The general was scheduled for a private briefing with the command staff. Instead, he turned to the base commander. "I'd like a word with Sergeant Rostova. Alone." The request, delivered in a tone that brooked no argument, sent a ripple through the officers. Eva felt every pair of eyes on her as she followed the general's broad back towards the command tent. Deacon and Master Sergeant Cole exchanged a worried glance. This was unprecedented. Inside the tent, the general dismissed his aides with a curt nod. The canvas flap fell shut, leaving the two of them in the dim, filtered light. The air was thick with the smell of dust and old canvas. General Madsen did not sit. He stood before her, his presence filling the space. He didn't mention the medal or the ambush. He pointed a finger, not accusatory, but with a trembling intensity, at the scars on her neck. "Those," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it seemed to shake the very ground. "I haven't seen scarring like that since 1989. Operation Silent Night. The agent who earned them died a hero, saving a dozen lives, including mine." He took a step closer, his face a battlefield of confusion and dawning horror. "So I will ask you one more time, Sergeant. Who are you?" The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her answer. The silence in the tent was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of a generator. Eva stood frozen, the general's words hanging in the air like gun smoke. Operation Silent Night. The name was a key turning in a lock deep inside her, a lock she had kept sealed for a lifetime. She saw the truth in his eyes, the raw, unvarnished grief of a man confronting a ghost. The carefully constructed walls around her identity crumbled in that moment. There was no point in lying. The man before her had already seen the truth etched into her skin. Without a word, her movements slow and deliberate, she turned her back to him. Her fingers went to the hem of her uniform shirt. The fabric was damp with sweat. She lifted it just high enough to reveal the skin on her lower back, between her shoulder blades. There, etched in simple, stark black ink, was the tattoo. It was not a unit insignia or a patriotic slogan. It was a name and a date. Silent Night, 1989. A sharp, choked gasp escaped General Madsen. It was the sound of a man who had just seen a miracle and a tragedy fused into one. He stumbled back a step, his hand reaching out to steady himself against a map table. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale and suddenly old. "My God," he breathed, the words barely audible. "Anya." That was her call sign. She was reported killed. They said there was nothing left. His eyes, wide with disbelief, flickered from the tattoo to Eva's face, searching for a resemblance he now saw with painful clarity. Eva let her shirt fall and turned to face him. The mask was gone. In its place was a lifetime of sorrow and unanswered questions. "Her name was Anya Rostova," Eva said, her voice trembling for the first time. "She was my mother. She wasn't killed in the initial attack. She was captured. She was tortured for information she never gave." Eva's hand unconsciously went to the scars on her neck. These aren't from training. I was there. I was 8 years old. We were in a safe house that was compromised. She shielded me with her own body when the bullets came through the window. She saved me. She always saved me. General Madsen sank into a chair, the weight of decades of guilt pressing down on him. I sent her on that mission, he whispered, staring at his hands as if they were stained. I was the case officer. When we lost contact, we assumed the worst. We had to scrub the entire network. We left her behind. The confession hung in the air, a terrible shared burden. He looked at Ava, seeing not just a soldier, but the living legacy of his greatest failure. All these years, we thought she died a hero. But she died a martyr, and she left a daughter behind. The story of Operation Silent Night, a file he believed closed forever, was now standing before him, alive and breathing, demanding a reckoning. The floodgates opened. The sterile confines of the command tent vanished, replaced by the haunting memories of a cold, rain-slicked Berlin night. Eva's voice was low, a steady stream of pain held in check for 20 years. She spoke of a childhood lived in shadows, of safe houses that never felt safe, of a mother whose laughter was increasingly rare, but whose love was a fierce, constant shield. She described the man who raised her after, a retired operative named Ivan, her mother's closest friend who had smuggled her out of the chaos. It was Ivan who had trained her, not for revenge, but for survival and for the truth. The official file says missing, presumed dead, Eva said, her gaze fixed on a point far beyond the tent walls. But Ivan knew. He knew she was taken. He heard whispers, fragments of intelligence about an agent who wouldn't break, held in a black site for years. He believed she might still be alive, long after everyone else had given up hope. She explained that her entire life, her decision to join the military, her relentless drive to excel in signals intelligence, it was all a journey to get closer to the classified world her mother had vanished from. She was searching for a ghost, using the resources of the very system that had abandoned her. General Madsen listened, his head bowed. He was no longer a four-star general. He was a man shattered by the weight of a terrible personal debt. The betrayal, he finally said, his voice gravelly with emotion. We never found the source. The mission was compromised from the inside. We spent years looking, but the trail went cold after the wall fell. The chaos buried everything. He looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed. I have carried the guilt of her loss every day of my life. To know she endured that, and that you endured this. He gestured weakly at her scars, a symbol of a stolen childhood. Eva nodded, a profound sadness in her eyes. She never broke, Eva whispered, the words filled with a daughter's fierce pride. Ivan told me that until the end, she protected her network. She died so others could live. That's the story that was never told. Not the mission failure, but her sacrifice. She looked directly at the general, the soldier in her now facing the man who held the keys to her past. I'm not here for medals or recognition. I'm here because the men who did this, the ones who betrayed her, they might still be out there. Their methods, their tradecraft, the ambush in the valley. It was too precise. It felt familiar. In that moment, the personal tragedy collided with the present danger. Eva's quest was no longer just about the past. It was a warning about a threat that had never truly gone away. The ghost of Operation Silent Night had reached into the present, and the daughter was the only one who could see the connection. The morning sun bathed the forward operating base in a harsh, golden light glinting off the assembled ranks of soldiers standing at perfect attention. The air was still, the usual sounds of the base silenced for the formation. Every man and woman of Valkyrie team was there, their faces set in stern lines. But the atmosphere was different from the day before. This was not a ceremony for a single act of bravery. This was something deeper, more profound. General John Madsen stood before them, and the change in him was visible to all. The stern, unapproachable commander was gone. In his place stood a man humbled by history, his shoulders squared not just with authority, but with a heavy, newfound respect. He did not use a microphone. His voice, strong and clear, carried across the dusty parade ground. "Soldiers," he began, his eyes sweeping over the faces before him. "We often speak of courage. We award it, we pin medals on it, but sometimes the deepest courage is the one that leaves no record. It is the courage that is passed down like a sacred trust, a flame carried through the darkness by those who remember." He spoke of sacrifice, of legacies that are written not in official reports, but in the hearts of those who come after. He never mentioned Eva's name. He never spoke of Operation Silent Night, but every word was a tribute to her and the ghost she carried. "You looked at a soldier's scars and saw a story of injury," he said, his gaze finally settling on Ava, who stood rigidly at attention within her team. "I challenge you now to see them as I do. See them as a testament to survival. A reminder that the cost of our freedom is often paid by those whose names we will never know, and protected by those we are only just beginning to understand." The silence was absolute. Deacon, Master Sergeant Cole, every man who had once doubted her, now understood. The laughter was a distant, shameful memory, replaced by a swelling tide of respect. General Madsen took a final step forward. He did not call Eva out. Instead, he turned fully to face her. And then, in front of the entire command, in front of the soldiers she had saved, he did something no one had ever seen him do. He rendered a salute. It was not the quick, professional gesture of a superior officer. It was slow, deliberate, and filled with a depth of emotion that stunned the onlookers. His hand held perfectly sharp, his eyes locked on hers. It was a salute to Sergeant Eva Rostova, to her mother Anya, and to the unbreakable line of sacrifice that connected them. Eva returned the salute, her own movement crisp and perfect. As her hand came down, a single tear escaped, tracing a clean path through the dust on her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, but of release. For the first time, her burden was shared. Her mother's story had been heard, her sacrifice acknowledged by the highest authority. She was no longer an outsider hiding a secret pain. She was a soldier, her legacy honored, her place earned. The formation was dismissed, but the men of Valkyrie team did not immediately move. They waited until Eva turned, and then, one by one, they offered her their own silent, solemn nods. The laughter had died forever, replaced by the unwavering bond of those who finally knew the true meaning of the word hero.